What's up? That's right, folks. This is another special intro for another special episode of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock with your host, Kenneth the K-Rock Klein. Hey, that's me. And this is episode number 34. Wow, 34 episodes. 34, one of my favorite numbers, along with 45, 4, 7, I don't know, anything to do with the 4. Well, maybe not 54 or 84 or, what have you. But anyways, folks, enough with the numbers game. It's time for another episode of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping. And, folks, we got a very special episode for you. For the first segment, I'm actually going to be talking about a 30 for 30 documentary that I saw. And I might be getting into a little bit of a croc attack, if you will, because this was an episode that I saw that really talks about probably the biggest scandal in the history of the Paralympics, and it's definitely one that is very sensitive to me and very touching. So I'm definitely going to be discussing my thoughts on that and why I think it's one that you probably should watch, although I would give you caution to not be expecting a happy, well, there is a little bit of a happy ending to it, but it's definitely going to be one of the most emotional ones that you will ever be able to watch. And then, of course, I'm going to be discussing about the Cincinnati Bengals. What's wrong with them? They're currently 0-3. Why are they struggling? Is it the coach's fault? Is it the play of the offense? Are there some distractions happening on the field? Can they turn things around and make it to the playoffs? We'll check on that as well. I'll give out my quick predictions for NFL Week 4. I was sort of at 500 last week, so hopefully my predictions this week are better than last week. But then, if all goes well tonight, we could be broadcasting the final inning of the Astros, who are in position to clinch the American League West Division for the 7th time in their 8-year dynastic run. Yes, I'm still saying it. Fight me if you will, but I'm going to win that argument no matter what. So anyways, potentially, if the Astros are winning or if it's like a tie game or so in the 9th inning, I'll be broadcasting that unless, things happen. But if it's a situation where they're losing and it's not going to happen, then we're just going to have to scratch that off as well. So anyways, folks, we're going to be doing a little bit of broadcasting tonight if all goes according to plan. And we're going to step aside real fast. But first, we're going to be talking about the controversy that happened and why this 30 for 30 documentary I watch is one that y'all would definitely want to enjoy or watch. Maybe not enjoy it, but definitely watch because, man, I got to tell you, it's very sensitive to me. Very emotional. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. So, now we come to the segment that I really most want to talk about, and that, of course, is a recent 30 for 30 documentary that I saw. Now, one thing about ESPN, as much as we tend to have polarizing expressions or mixed emotions about how ESPN is doing as far as their coverage is concerned or what have you, one thing that they are really good at is creating documentaries, particularly the 30 for 30 movies. Initially, this was started back in 2009 in honor of the 30th anniversary of ESPN. They decided that they were going to pick 30 movies, 30 documentaries to make, and, they choose ones to pay tribute to the stories that took place in the decades from 1979 to 2009 at least. So you're talking about, you have Reggie Miller, the Miami Hurricane Saga, SMU, and there's a bunch of others, some really great ones for that matter. And I tell you what, watching all those, there's some that I haven't really watched, but there's also that ones that I'm kind of struggling to get around to watching. But man, I really like those. I really enjoy watching those 30 for 30s, to say the least. But it's become so popular that ESPN has expanded to having seasons 2, season 3, and then they're just continuing season 4 by just throwing in all these 30 for 30 documentaries, some of which are multiple episodes for that matter. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some 30 for 30s that I like, and there's 30 for 30s that I really want to see, and hopefully done right in a positive way. But anyway, so a few nights ago, I watched a documentary, 30 for 30, and this is one that really touched me in a bit of a personal way. So I don't like talking about this as much because I tend to struggle with what I'm feeling. You probably know that at times on my podcast I tend to struggle to find some words, to say, and you might be thinking, "What's wrong?" I mean, are you stuck? Are you like a robot or something like that? Sometimes I feel like I'm a robot, but I am autistic. I do have Asperger's syndrome, and for those of you that don't know what exactly that is, it's basically, it refers to a broad range of conditions characterized by challenges with social skills, repetitive behavior, speech and nonverbal communication, and there's definitely people that are being diagnosed at a higher number. Nowadays, it's 1 in 36 in kids and 1 in 45 today in all the adults, at least in the United States. But, back when I was first diagnosed, it was kind of a rare thing, or not necessarily rare, but it wasn't diagnosed at a consistent rate that it is now. And people really didn't have an understanding of it. Now, I don't think that I was ever picked on because of it. I mean, my parents said that I was a really good kid. I never had any sort of behavioral related issues. But yeah, I do have it. And it is kind of frustrating, really sad. And it's just, for me, I tend to struggle with it sometimes because, yeah, I have my fair share of friends. And I know they love me just as much as I love them. But, you just wish that you didn't have autism. It's definitely helped me out in some positive ways. But then there are some ways that it's kind of given me a negative perspective on some things. So just my few cents on me with autism and everything, and I try not to talk about it as much, but I like to think of myself as a normal person in a way, and yeah, I just figured I'd throw that out there. So just kind of giving y'all a heads up as to why you might be hearing me with some speech trouble or word miscommunications at times. But anyway, so going back to this 30 for 30 documentary, this is about a man by the name of Ramon Torres. Now, he was born in England, even though his parents were Spanish. And he was born in England, and early on, he was picked on in school because apparently he had an intellectual disability. I don't really know specifically what type, but I want to say it was like ADHD or dyslexia. He struggled to read and was, considered stupid by not only the students at his school who picked on him, but the teachers would also think of him as such, and oftentimes he would be put in detention and he would have to wear that stupid dunce hat, which I think is ridiculous. I mean, it's what are you trying to prove? Like, you put someone in timeout and they have to wear that hat and make everybody look stupid? That's just ridiculous. I don't understand that whole teaching method in a way. So he got picked on a lot in school, and then one night, he and his sister were watching this movie, and when they started to hear the yeah, you know what I'm talking about. They were watching Rocky, and that's when he started to learn to stand up for himself. His sister taught him how to stand up for himself, and there's this moment in the scene, or in the documentary, where he was reflecting on his childhood, and he actually got picked on by some kids who knocked him down again. But every time he got knocked down, he kept getting back up, and he would take more and more, but he kept getting back up. And that freaked out the bullies of the school, and he apparently decided, he wasn't picked on again. They didn't mess with him after some time. Well, more trouble comes around when he moves to Spain, and his parents had separated, and that's when he starts to learn to play basketball. And he started learning the game, and he actually becomes pretty good. He's one of the best basketball players, disabled, of course, intellectually disabled. And he was really, really good. And he was often one of, the best players on the basketball team, or the basketball teams that he was on. Then he got picked for some local teams that traveled around the world, and they were able to do really well. And before long, Spain had decided that they decided that they were going to form a Paralympic basketball team. Now, for those that don't know about the Paralympics, it's like the Olympic Games for disabled athletes, but typically, they usually take place about a month or so after the regular Olympics are done, and they're hosted in the same city. So in 2000, the games were in Sydney, Australia, and that's when Spain decided that they were going to put together a Paralympic basketball team. And there was this one coach from one of the local teams around. He thought that he had a number of players that were going to make the team. And he was expecting a phone call for him to say, okay, you're going to have this amount of players from your team make the squad, make the national team. He never got that phone call. And that's when he started to get a little bit suspicious that something just wasn't right. Well, Ramon Torres was able to make the team. And he and another player joined along with 10 players. So there was a 12-man team on the Spanish disabled squad. And they traveled up to Sydney to compete in the Summer Olympic Games. And, they do so well. Like, they dominate. Like, it's almost as if it's like the United States men's basketball team competing against the disabled and really just taking it right to him. Like the Dream Team in '92, taking it to the the other teams in the '92 competition, which happened to be hosted by Spain, by the way. But it was such a dominant victory that you say to yourself, man, they really must have a great disabled team. Like 12 players, all with disabilities, maybe the best intellectually disabled team in the history of not just basketball, but in all of the sports and all of the competition. Like, they really just dominated hands down. And they end up winning the gold medal against Russia. And Ramon Torres, who for most of his life had struggled for acceptance, he had a relationship with his dad, which was really rocky. And for most of his life, he looked for acceptance. He finally felt like he achieved something. He finally won the gold medal. And he was proudly holding on to it so much, and he wasn't going to take it off anytime soon. So he finally felt like he achieved something so incredible, so remarkable. And for a few hours or so, at least a few weeks, he was on top of the world. Everything was going great. Then, about a week later, a story broke out that not everything about Spain's gold medal performance was as pure as it was. There was an allegation that some of the players on the team were not actually disabled. And they did an investigation, and the more the story came out, the more you started to realize that this isn't true. Now, here's the crazy part about all this. There's a few crazy parts. This story started with a man by the name of Fernando Martinez Vicente, who was the president of the Spanish Federation for Mentally Handicapped Sports, or FEDI as it was called. And it was really one of the nicest organizations. It basically helped out for people with disabled athletes, trying to get some profits, or just making them perform in these competitions to help them out as well. But one thing about organizations you need to realize is they need money, they need grants and everything. And in order for them to get money and to get these government grants, you have to win. You basically have to be successful in all the sporting events that you're able to compete. And the more medals you get, the more grants you get. So, for whatever reason, Fernando Martinez Vicente, who, of course, had started out, with this idea of helping out disabled athletes with good cause. It was a really good cause, but he was feeling the pressure to get some government grants, and he decides, we got to do something. We need to be successful. And so what he decides to do, and this is really the shocking part, is he decides to have the Spain men's basketball team carry some members of the team that weren't disabled. And you say to yourself, well, how is that possible? How in the world can you have regular, normal people that aren't disabled pretend to be disabled? Well, for starters, in order for you to qualify for such a thing, there were some guidelines you had to meet. You had to take some mental test to test out your intelligence in a way. And one of the major guidelines is you have to take an IQ test, and you need to have an IQ of 75 or lower. If you have an IQ of lower than 75, then you're on the team. Just like that. And then there was all these other physical tests, which involved like push-ups and other stuff, but nothing really that serious. So the biggest thing, of course, was you had to have these athletes, be certified to know that, hey, they have an IQ of lower than 75, and they're on the team as well. Now, it would be one thing if there were 1, 2, 3, 4 players on the team. Like, it would be one thing if you had about a third of those players on the team be non-disabled. So you would have like 8 players that were disabled and 4 that were not. It'd be one thing to have 4. But they were so desperate. The organization was. They were so desperate that of the 12 players that were on the team, only 10 were non-disabled. 10 non-disabled players out of the 12 teams. That means that 2 of those players were disabled. And Ramon Torres was one of them. Now, Ramon had no idea what was going on. He would often hang out with his other disabled teammates, but whenever, they would go around the Olympic Village or Paralympic Village just to see other sports and other competitions. And what they, when they would ask the others to, spend some time to hang out with them, the others were like, sorry, yeah, we're not going to do that. They wouldn't hang out. So Ramon got this suspicion that something just wasn't right. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt that there was clearly something not right. But either way, he was still on the team and he was still playing. And they end up winning the gold medal. But now all of a sudden, this story breaks out that their 10 players were disabled. And you say to yourself, how in the world did this story leak out that there were 10 players that were disabled on the Spanish team? Well, major twist, ladies and gentlemen. One of those 10 players was actually an undercover journalist. Yes, an undercover journalist was on the roster with all the other members of the team, and he would play in some of the games, but he also would actually he would be reporting the story back to his organization. And Carlos Ribagordo was the name of the underground journalist. He was, covering the team. He was making sure, he was listening to all the stories that were happening. He found out that this had been done before in previous World Cups, and they were going to do it again at the Olympic or Paralympic Games. And that's when he knew that this was a serious problem. And he was interviewed in this documentary talking about his experiences. And, what happened was that there was a lot of investigations that were taking place. And it turns out that the organization, the Spanish Paralympic Committee, which was supposed to certify the tests of the competitors, the ones that were told that they had to have an IQ of no more than 75, they didn't conduct those tests. And then he also found out that there were other athletes from Spain that were not disabled and had also competed in other sporting events, and those had not been won those had not been won fairly. So then he puts out the story and he explains what happened, and this causes a lot of stir. It causes a lot of controversy. Everybody was shocked. How can they do this? This was such a remarkable moment for Spain, having a disabled team, and yet only 2 players were disabled, and they found out about that. And 10 players, why? Why would they do that? Now, there was one player on the team that wasn't disabled who was interviewed for the story, and he talked about how he was going to get on the plane to go to Sydney, and then he realized that most of the players were not disabled, but yet he couldn't get off the plane in time. It was a no-win situation for him, and he should have. And obviously, he looks back on it with regret. He hadn't spoken about it for a long time, and he finally had the opportunity to do so. And I watched him, and I feel real bad for him, but in a way, he should have known better. He should have reported it to somebody, but he didn't do that. And he just went along and saying, look, I'm a basketball player. I want to win the gold medal, and I compete. I don't want to lose on purpose. I want to compete to win. That's what I plan to do. I'm a competitor. And here's the other crazy part about this story. These people had normal jobs. You had an accountant. You had someone that worked in business. It was insane. Because imagine how many people looked at the newspaper with all the pictures of the Spanish team celebrating their gold medal, and they say, hey, I know this person. This guy's not disabled. What is this guy doing on a team? And that's when everything just basically blew up with the controversy. So at that point, the investigation happens. They found so much, and finally they decided that Spain had to be stripped of their gold medals and had to give it back. And for Ramon Torres, it was very crushing. He was not involved in the scandal. He didn't know about the scandal. He didn't know what was happening around him because, again, he was one of the 2 players that were disabled. But at the same time, he was a part of the team, and unfortunately, like so much in society, people that aren't directly involved but are still part of the organization in question, they get affected. And that's the hardest part. That's what really makes me upset, because Ramon Torres had no knowledge whatsoever, but yet his life has been affected because when you think about him, he's on the team, and everyone's saying, oh, the Spain team, they cheated and this and that. They had, non-disabled players on the team. Well, it wasn't everybody. Ramon Torres was, again, not one of them. So it was a real shocking story. And just looking at Ramon Torres, watching him, the man has now gotten a beard. He's got tattoos all over him. He went through a lot of, tough crap afterwards. And he has finally, he seems to be at peace, and he seems to be doing well as of the documentary. But you can just imagine having to go through all that. And to me, it's really one of the saddest stories that I've ever heard of in all of, sports. In all honesty, I know there's been a lot of stuff. We could talk about drug usage. We could talk about bounties, deflated footballs, stolen signs. I mean, we could talk about other cases, of cheating, or back in the old days where people were paying players when nowadays it's indirectly allowed, although there are still some limitations to that. We could talk about all the other stuff that happened in previous years, but this, in my opinion, has to be the worst scandal in the history of the Olympics, or Paralympics, for that matter, or any sport whatsoever. I mean, yes, there were no drugs involved. There was no case of, trying to get an advantage by, deflating basketballs or causing harm to other teams from a physical perspective. This was a case where you had 10 guys that did not have a disability that played basketball, and just because it was free travel to Australia and an opportunity to win the gold medal, which was highly expected. But that was not the end of it. There were other cases of fraud involved. I mean, Fernando Vicente, the man in charge of all this and the one who got himself, busted for that, he actually was holding on to some of the grants that were supposed to be given to the athletes. And he has since, he's since denied it, obviously, but, he wasn't interviewed for the story, but it really makes me, upset. Obviously, he did say that, he apologized later on for the error, and he did resign from that reaction, or from his position. But, the hardest part for me is it makes you think about Ramon, who had been picked on as a kid for his disability. I can't say, as someone that's disabled, that I was picked on as a child. I might have had some confrontations with some other kids. Not that I don't recall any of them or never got into any fights. So you could honestly say I was lucky. But for Ramon, it just makes you feel like he got picked on again. Because he had this once in a lifetime shining moment and it got taken away from him. All because of somebody, some stupid idiot or some stupid decision to make this gold medal so rigged heavily by having non-disadvantaged players. And all because for the sake of making more money for the organization to keep going on. And, I mean, every organization needs to survive with money. I get it. Without money, you're in some serious trouble. But the way that these people go to, the links that these people go to get money, it just really makes me upset and disappointed. I mean, if I were ever on a team that won a championship, accomplished a great thing, and I'm so excited, I celebrate and everything, and then I come to find out that not everything about it was pure, yeah, I would be pissed. I would be angry. That's already happened to me twice in my life. And I've forgiven the teams that I support that got themselves involved in this, but I'm still basically mad. Not so much for not so much because the events that happened, like they happened. I'm not happy that they did, but at the end of the day, I'm more upset over the fact that this situation is just frustrating and it just makes me mad. I'm more upset over the fact that the people that still cover it consider them to be, still cheaters. Once a cheater, always a cheater. That's not right. That's not right. No, look, if they make a mistake, let them learn from it. Let them learn from it, and then they can maybe, hopefully, change your perspective of them. You may not forget about what happened. You can forgive, but you may not forget. But everything is about learning to give people second chances to atone for themselves. Now, but in this particular case, it makes me cringe inside to know that this is the action that goes towards these people. And I'm very sad, and it makes me disappointed, because I think about a lot of friends that work with disabled people. I think about somebody like Molly Walker, who's a friend of mine that I knew starting in middle school, went to high school and college with, and she's married, she's got a beautiful kid. She works with people with special ed kids, disabled kids, and she really cares for them. Can you imagine what she would say if these kids, had accomplished something so special, accomplished something great in their lives, only for it to be taken away through no fault of their own, because some people, some shady, questionable people of their own, that decided that they were going to make this for their own benefit and their own gain. How do you think she would feel? How do you think they would feel? I mean, she would be very upset, because the last thing you want is to make those kids' lives very much more difficult because of a decision by one person in particular. So, I mean, what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do in that situation? Like, you're mad and you're angry about all this. And to me, it just makes me mad. Because I feel like disabled people in this world need to be treated with respect. How in the world do you bring 10 non-disabled players, replacing 10 spots for disabled players that may or may not be able to win the gold medal for Spain? How do you let greed get in the way? I apologize that this is, if you're hearing silences and all that, because this makes me upset. This makes me disappointed. So, Yeah, I'm just really upset with the whole situation. And Malls, I apologize if I mention your name. I know you're doing a great job with those kids, and you deserve, you know, those kids deserve to be treated with kindness, love, and respect. I think every people of all disabilities should be treated with love, kindness, and respect. Because I know that even if I might not look like a person that's disabled, I might not talk about myself being a disabled person. The truth is, as someone with autism, I feel like we deserve the same respect and treatment as well. So that's just the way I look at it. But I do wish for the best for Ramon Torres and the Spanish team. I do wish for the happiness of everybody, of him and everybody else that's disabled. But man, what happened in Spain was so terrible. And even worse was that this whole scandal caused the committee to put an end to allowing athletes of intellectual disabilities to compete in the Paralympics. Now, they have since brought back intellectual disabilities, but basketball is not a sport that has been brought back. And I understand why. I understand why that they decided to, not have it, because with basketball, it's easy for people to, it could be a game where if you play so well, you might have people suspicious of you. I think they don't want to bring that back to this point, but ultimately, I do think that it's the right decision to have people of intellectual disabilities come back, and play, because I feel like they were trying not to have an embarrassment of a situation like that in the first place. So it is heartbreaking to have to go through that, but man, I mean, we could talk about all the strip things. I mean, history will remember that Spain won, but it's almost like Spain had a dark moment. And to me, it's very emotional talking about it, because the two players that were disabled on the team, they didn't have to be treated like that. They didn't do anything wrong. They were part of a team that they thought was a gold medal winning team, but it was a bit of a slap to the face for them to go through that. So ultimately, I do hope that both of them are able to find peace and comfort and find something to make them successful in life, because they don't deserve to have a negative ending in their life. They both deserve to live happily ever after, those two players. So that's just kind of my thoughts on that. I think the documentary was a really great documentary. For those that haven't seen it, I would recommend you watching it. It's really, I wouldn't say it's probably the best one I've seen, but it's definitely one of the top ones for sure. And that's going to conclude my review on the 30 for 30 documentary. Now, folks, we're going to step aside. We're going to get back to a little bit more of a lighter subject here, and we're going to be discussing why the Cincinnati Bengals are struggling and if they can turn things around and still make the playoffs. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. We are 3 weeks into the NFL season, and there have been plenty of surprises. Now, we look at the teams that are currently undefeated at this point. Obviously, the Kansas City Chiefs, 3-0. The Buffalo Bills, 3-0. I mean, that's a big deal for Buffalo, even though they're still a good team, but they're 3-0, which is amazing. First time they've been 3-0 to start the season since 2020. But then, you look at the other 3 teams that are 3-0. The Pittsburgh Steelers are 3-0, with Justin Fields as their quarterback. That's pretty impressive, considering that there was going to be a lot of quarterback controversy relating to the Steelers. Then you have the Minnesota Vikings, who I don't want to say they will be exposed. I mean, they're playing out of their minds right now. Do I think they are a legitimate contender for a Super Bowl? Probably not. But I think if Sam Darnold and the Vikings can manage to keep this going, and if the defense led by Brian Flores as the defensive coordinator can continue to expose teams like they did to the Texans on Sunday, then you might be seeing a very underrated sleeper team as a team that could legitimately be an NFC contender. But there's still lots of the season left to be played. And then the Seattle Seahawks. Let's not forget about them. The Seahawks definitely surprising everyone at this point in the NFC West. I don't know if it's necessarily that the Seahawks are the surprise team of the NFC West, but more like the 49ers are the surprise team of the NFC West. Because right now the Niners are currently 1-2 after a disappointing loss to the Los Angeles Rams. So clearly there's definitely some surprises, but it's almost like, yeah, it's a great start for them, but you still got more games to be played as well. And so therefore, let's just see if they can continue this momentum here, because I think eventually you're going to see the pretenders and the contenders later on as the season goes on, but you just never really know. So definitely big surprising starts from these 5 teams. Now, with that being said, for every team that's undefeated, there's also going to be a team that is probably winless. And to this point, there are 3 teams that are winless. 2 of them happen to be in the AFC South Division, the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Tennessee Titans. I mean, the Titans are kind of putting themselves in the forefront of that spot. And then the Jacksonville Jaguars, they're having their own struggles, but I'm struggling to see them going 0-4, although I will get into my predictions for that game later on in my next segment. But it's the 3rd team that is very surprising, because everybody is surprised and shocked that the Cincinnati Bengals are 0-3. Well, I don't know if you would say that they would be shocked, because let's be realistic here. The Cincinnati Bengals have had this habit for the last few seasons that they start the season going 0-2, and then they bounce back and they're able to get themselves to either the playoffs or coming close to making the playoffs. And it's almost as if Cincinnati has this habit that they believe that the real season starts in September. Oh man, if this were Major League Baseball, and if this were Major League Baseball where you play a football game every day or so, you might be right. But this is not Major League Baseball. There's not 162 games. There's 17 games in the NFL, and you play it on a week-to-week basis where you do have a couple of off weeks. But man, Cincinnati, you're 0-3. I mean, literally, you are 0-3. And here's the crazy part. I really thought that the AFC North was going to be the most competitive division out of all the AFC divisions. And to this point, the Steelers are 3-0, as I said. The Ravens and the Browns are both 1-2. Now, Baltimore almost choked away their game against Dallas, but they were able to hang on for the win. Cleveland, of course, they got their own issues. They're 1-2, after a tough loss over against the Giants and the Deshaun Watson situation, which isn't going away anytime soon unless they can figure things out. But, man, looking at the standings now, it is crazy to see the Cincinnati Bengals, the team that has been viewed as perhaps the biggest threat to Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs in their quest to being the first ever three-peat Super Bowl team. It is crazy to see the Cincinnati Bengals at the very bottom of the AFC North standings, and even in a worse situation than they were the year before. Now, what's going on with Cincinnati? What's going on? I mean, it seems like over the past few weeks, the Cincinnati Bengals have had some excuses. I mean, let's be realistic. The first game against the New England Patriots, a very close game, very sloppy, sluggish game. The Patriots won 16-10. First win for head coach Jared Mayo for Cincinnati. And the Bengals lost. So, what's the excuse? Well, the Bengals didn't really show up, But their thinking was, well, Joe Burrow, I mean, it was his first game back after his injury, and he kind of struggled. He was a little rusty, but hey, don't worry. We'll be fine. We'll be ready to go. Well, okay, you got the Kansas City Chiefs as your next game. And so week 2 happens, and I thought this was going to be a tough game for the Bengals to bounce back from after the loss. And they actually made a game out of it. They were in position to win the game, but as with the common conspiracy theories, the refs obviously favored the Chiefs for obvious reasons. Taylor Swift. But, no, I mean, in all seriousness, there were a few calls that went the Chiefs' way that led to them winning the game in the end. And Cincinnati's like, man, we played so well against the Chiefs. We know we can beat them if we just had this go our way. If this call didn't go our way, if it had gone our way, then it would have clearly been, an advantage for us. We would have won the game. Okay, well, that's fine. That's a legitimate excuse. You played decently well, but you also lost the game. So now you're 0-2 for the third year in a row, and then you're starting to think, hey, we're 0-2. But you know what? The last few years, we've been playing pretty well when we start 0-2. So we'll be fine. I mean, we didn't make the playoffs last year. We made it with Joe Burrow. We're fine. We're still a good team. We're still the best team in the AFC. We feel like, yeah, we may be 0-2, but we'll prove that we're the best team. Well, consider this a shocking warning for you Bengals, because now you're 0-3. You not only lost, but you lost to a Washington Commanders team that has a rookie quarterback named Jaden Daniels, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, I might add, who puts together arguably the best performance of the season, completing 90% of his passes. Like, for every 10 passes he throws, 9 of them find the hands of a receiver. How in the world are you, how in the world are you crazy? How can you let that happen? How can you let Jaden Daniels torch you like he did on, Monday Night Football? And how in the world can you mention that? But my goodness gracious, I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous how the Cincinnati Bengals, lost the game to the Washington Commanders. And I'm just very shocked by this. Very shocked. I mean, I give credit to Washington. They're off to a good start. They're 2-1. They're still in first place in the NFC East. But wow. I mean, Cincinnati, it's crazy. Very, very crazy how you could lose a game like that. But now the Bengals have a major problem. Because unfortunately for Cincinnati, history is not in their favor. Now, I know people don't pay too much attention to history because, look, what happened in the past happened in the past. This is a new year and everything. But let's be realistic here. The Cincinnati Bengals find themselves in a very bad predicament. In the history of the NFL, in the Super Bowl era at least, only 6 teams in the history started 0-3, and yet they were able to turn their season around to make the playoffs. 6 teams. And if you count the fact that they expanded to 12 teams in the playoffs beginning in 1990, 2.5% of the teams made the playoffs since then. And yet, it's just crazy. Because 6 teams made the playoffs. The 1981 New York Jets, who started 0-3, they made the wild card. They made the playoffs, finishing with a 10-5-1 record, but ended up losing the first round game. 1982, now keep in mind, this was a very odd year because half of the season was wiped out because of the strike that happened, which canceled the season for 8 games. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers started the season 0-3. And yet they finished 5-4. But that 5-4 record was very good for an appearance as one of the 16 teams. Yes, there were 16 teams in the playoffs that year because of this. So they had like an NBA-type playoff bracket. But the Buccaneers made the wild card that year. So Tampa Bay gets in, even though it's by a short margin. Who knows what would have happened if they would have finished out the full season. But anyways, that counts for something. Tampa Bay made the playoffs. Then in 1992, the San Diego Chargers made NFL history by becoming the first 0-3 team to turn the season around and not only make the playoffs, but win the division. And then as an added bonus, they won their playoff game, but ended up losing to Miami. Then you have the 1995 Detroit Lions. Started 0-3, turned it around, made the playoffs as a wildcard team, but got shellacked in the postseason by the Philadelphia Eagles. Then there's the Buffalo Bills. 1998. 10-6 after starting 0-3, lost to Miami in the wildcard game. So, if you think about it, the 1990s there were some good stretches where teams that started 0-3 did in fact make the playoffs. Or barely made the playoffs for that matter. But then, you go through this 20-year gap where no team that went 0-3 made the playoffs. Until 2018 with the Houston Texans. And yes, this was when Deshaun Watson was the quarterback. The Texans started 0-3. They then won their next 9 games in a row and then managed to finish as the AFC South champions with an 11-5 record, but unfortunately lost to the Colts in the playoffs. So what does that tell you? History still favors the Cincinnati Bengals because it's rare for teams that start 0-3 to turn their season around and make the playoffs. But even rarer still, or actually it's not rare, but it hasn't happened yet. As mentioned with the teams I mentioned, no team in the NFL history had started 0-3 and have gone on to win the Super Bowl. So right now, the Cincinnati Bengals are in some pretty hot water, if you ask me. And I just don't know what else to say. I think clearly Cincinnati has some serious problems because I said a few podcasts ago that there was not a legitimate AFC threat to the Kansas City Chiefs. Yes, I know Buffalo is still out there, but Buffalo hasn't beaten them in the playoffs. The Ravens obviously can still turn it around, and they could be a big threat, but they didn't do anything against the Buffalo Bills, or not the Bills, but the Chiefs. The Texans, they're still kind of a young team, up and coming, and it may take a while before we can consider them to be big threats, unless they get hot. Cincinnati seemed to be the best option, but I don't know. Like, they're not playing well right now. I mean, the losses aren't bad. They're not getting blown out. Let's put it that way. That's the one thing that they got going for them. They're not bad losses, but the more you lose, the chances of you making the playoffs get slimmer and slimmer, and right now it is not looking good for Cincinnati. So that raises the question, should the Cincinnati Bengals go ahead and do something that they probably should have done years ago, and that would be to fire Zach Taylor? You know, Zach Taylor, to this point, I don't know how he still has a job. Like, let's be clear. You know, Zach Taylor as a head coach is not great. He's not terrible, but I just don't see him as being like a legitimate playoff caliber guy. I mean, the past 3 seasons have clearly seen Zach Taylor kind of get fortunate and lucky. In fact, that luck started when you had that incredible Super Bowl run. I think Zach Taylor might have been on the hot seat in the 2021 season, but then the Bengals get on this incredible Super Bowl run, and before you know it, they are 2 minutes away from winning the Super Bowl. And Zach Taylor, you know, he stays with the Bengals. Like, let's be clear. If you get a miraculous run all the way to the postseason, to the Super Bowl, and win or lose, you're still going to be the head coach, which is a remarkable achievement. But now it's a matter of proving that you're the right guy. So in 2022, you start 0-2, you make the playoffs, you reach the AFC Championship game, but then you lose to the Chiefs. Okay, it's still a good season, even if the loss was a bad one. But then you kind of struggle once again. You start to turn the corner. Everything seems to be going right for you, but then your quarterback gets injured. And Cincinnati plays with this backup quarterback. Plays pretty well, but just doesn't have enough to make the playoffs. So now you're in your 3rd year, and you're saying, hey, okay, this has got to be the year. We got to turn things around. And right now, it's not looking good. Zach Taylor, to me, is in a hot seat. And I feel like if he doesn't turn this thing around fast, his time's running out. I just don't see how he can continue being the head coach of the Bengals after this season. People can talk about the defensive struggles for Cincinnati. The Bengals obviously had a decent start game against the Patriots, but then they go out there, lay an egg against the Chiefs, and had a chance to win it there, but just don't do enough to stop Mahomes. Then they have this terrible performance against the Commanders. I mean, the defense is a problem. And right now, I feel like Cincinnati is just completely getting the sense of reality. It's a reality check. Now, I do credit Joe Burrow. I will say one thing. He says, we're by no means out of it, but the playoffs or winning division is the last thing on our minds, when he was asked in a press conference some time ago. And I think Joe Burrow is right, because right now, you can't win a division if you're 0-3. You just can't. You got to take it one game at a time. You got to start focusing on, the rest of your season. And if you are able to manage to put together some string of victories, you might find yourself back in the thick of the playoff race. And if you do make the playoffs, it may be as a 5, 6, or 7 seed, because right now, it's not looking good. I mean, the Bengals trail the Ravens, who are coming off a win. But let's look at the schedule for Cincinnati at this point. Cincinnati has to play Carolina, coming off a victory over the Raiders with Andy Dalton as the quarterback. Let me say that again. Andy Dalton as the quarterback, who started the season on the bench for Carolina and is now taken over for Bryce Young. And he had himself a legitimate performance against the Raiders. Then you got the Giants, a game that you should take care of business in, unless Malik Neighbors goes off. Then you got the Browns. Then you got the Eagles. Then you got the Raiders. Then the Ravens and the Chargers and the Steelers and the Cowboys. I mean, we're talking about a tough stretch for Cincinnati. Cincinnati is going to need to bear down and focus, have this one-game mentality, one game at a time mentality to pull off this turnaround and this comeback. Are the Cincinnati Bengals dead? No. But is there chances of making the playoffs getting slimmer and slimmer? Absolutely. I could see Cincinnati winning the next game, but if Andy Dalton goes off like that, that's going to be a very big problem. And at this point, what happened in Cincinnati, who could have won the Super Bowl a few years back, they're still in the mindset that, hey, we're going to be able to have this great season turning it around. No, forget about that. Forget about last year. Forget about the few years ago. Forget about it. This is your season on the line. Next week is your season on the line. If you don't win this game, if you don't turn it around, you're going to give Cincinnati fans another reason to suffer a massive heartbreak. Cincinnati Reds just fired their manager, David Bell, after a few seasons. It's very likely that Cincinnati will be without a head coach by the end of 2024. So, I don't know, Cincinnati. I mean, that's all I can really say. You're just screwing things up for your own fan base, a team that was expected to be a legitimate threat, and right now there's really nobody in contention to take down the Kansas City Chiefs. It's Kansas City against everyone else in the AFC. Somebody needs to step up. I certainly would like it for it to be my team, but I don't know if I would put him at that same tier yet. But, man, Cincinnati, you're becoming a bit of a joke at this point. You're starting off 0-2 again, and then you add one futility by going 0-3. Start winning some games. Get yourself back on track. Take it one game at a time. It's going to be a one-game season for y'all. That's the mindset you need to have. But for me, I just think Cincinnati's arrogance is the biggest factor. It's the biggest problem. Plus, you have all this contract situations with Jamar Chase. And then, of course, T. Higgins, who has not been much of a factor for the Bengals. And then, look, I don't care about fashion statements and everything, but as far as I'm concerned, Joe Burrow's haircut, not good. You're not Eminem, Joe. You don't deserve to be on the same page with Eminem because he's had more success than you've had in your NFL career. You were a better college football player than you are in the NFL. If you want to show everyone that you're still the same Joe Burrow that won the hearts of everyone during your Super Bowl win, start acting like it. But man, I just don't know what else to say. Joe Burrow clearly needs to get going. His career he's not being wasted in Cincinnati, but it's not looking good for the Bengals at this point. So as far as I'm concerned, if Joe Burrow and the Bengals don't turn things around, their season is done. And we could be looking at a new threat in the AFC that is not the Cincinnati Bengals. So that's just my takes on the matter. I think Cincinnati is not dead, but their chances of making the playoffs are getting slimmer and slimmer. And speaking of chances of getting things right, I will be making my predictions for NFL Week 4. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. Folks, I'm going to do my NFL predictions for the 4th week right now, but I'm going to have to do this really quickly because right now, looking at the game, it's the Astros who are currently leading 4-3 in the bottom of the 8th inning against the Seattle Mariners, so hopefully I can get all my predictions in before the inning comes to an end. Now, the 16 games, last time I went 500, so as of right now, my overall record for these predictions are 29-19. So with that being said, here are my predictions for the for these Week 4 games. First up, we got Dallas against the New York Giants. I think the Dallas Cowboys are going to have a bounce-back game over the Giants just because of, the stress that they've had to play out. And I think the Giants, might have had a fortunate break against the Cleveland Browns in the last game. So therefore, I think the Cowboys are due for a bounce-back win, even though right now they're kind of struggling going 1-2. Cincinnati and Carolina. Now, I talked about the Bengals and whether or not they'll be able to recover from this season. They're taking on Carolina, who, of course, has Andy Dalton as the quarterback of the team at the moment. And this is going to be a tough one, but I think Cincinnati will bounce back from this. I'm confident, but you just never know. So I'm picking Cincinnati to win. If they go 0-4, then yeah, there's a serious problem down there in Cincy. Atlanta and New Orleans, divisional game. Obviously, I wish I want to pick the New Orleans Saints. Unfortunately, the game is in Atlanta, and I think the Falcons, who are coming off a tough loss to the Kansas City Chiefs, really played them pretty well, except for a few breaks. But ultimately, I think the Falcons will bounce back and get the win over New Orleans. Sorry, New Orleans. I hope you forgive me because I think, it wouldn't surprise me if y'all win, but I'm picking Atlanta to beat New Orleans. Houston and Jacksonville. Now, this is a game that concerns me more now because of the fact that Texans are coming off a tough loss over the Vikings, and you're taking on a Jacksonville team that is very desperate to get themselves a win. They're 0-3 right now, and I really struggle with seeing Jacksonville going 0-4, but I'm probably going to hit myself on the head for this if they don't win. So therefore, I'm picking the Houston Texans to bounce back against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think it'll be a closer game, though. Let's just be real honest here. Jacksonville is a very good team, and we'll see how everything bounces back for Houston, as of course they are having the game at home. New York Jets against the Denver Broncos. I think the Broncos, coming off a big win the last time, but I just think Aaron Rodgers and the Jets will find a way to get the job done down there, so I'm picking the Jets. You got Minnesota and Green Bay. Now, the Vikings are becoming the surprise team of the NFL at 3-0. Sam Darnold playing out of his mind. Taking on the Packers, who may or may not have Jordan Love back this week. But I think Minnesota is continuing to roll, and I think they'll be able to get themselves a victory. So I'm picking Minnesota over Green Bay. We got Pittsburgh and Indianapolis. Now, the Pittsburgh Steelers, also undefeated at 3-0. They're taking on a Colts team that is currently 1-2. But in my personal opinion, I think the way Justin Fields is playing, I think it should be enough to get the Steelers over the hump and get this one to go 4-0. So that's just my prediction. The Rams coming off a win over the 49ers, taking on the Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams continuing to have a little bit of trouble adjusting in the NFL, and I think that unfortunately is going to come back. It wouldn't surprise me if Williams does have a very decent game, but I just think right now he's not playing like the front runner for Rookie of the Year, much like Jaden Daniels is. So I think the Rams will have their way over the Bears this time around. Tampa Bay and Philadelphia. The Buccaneers against the Eagles. Man, this is going to be a very tough game because right now the Eagles are struggling. They're 1-2. Tampa Bay, on the other hand, among the top teams in the NFC South, looking to repeat as division champions. And after this dominant upset and the way things are going in Philadelphia, I think I have a little bit more confident in Tampa Bay getting the win. San Francisco against New England. 49ers down at the bottom of the pack, but I wouldn't count them out just yet, although I do wonder if this is the beginning of the Super Bowl hangover where things are going to go wrong for the 49ers. But for this occasion, I'm going to be picking them to win the game against New England. Washington and Arizona. Jaden Daniels coming off a big win over the Cincinnati Bengals, looking to duplicate that. A battle of Heisman Trophy quarterbacks as he goes up against Kyler Murray. I think it's going to be another tough game, but I think Washington will get this one, and they will go 2-3-1. Kansas City and the Chargers. Now, here's perhaps the big test of a game for the Kansas City Chiefs. Taking on the Chargers, Jim Harbaugh, national championship coach of Michigan, versus Patrick Mahomes, Super Bowl champion for the Chiefs. This is going to be a good one. I think the Chargers are probably going to be the biggest threat to the Chiefs in the AFC West, but I still think the Chiefs will get this one in a win. Then you have the Raiders looking to bounce back from a difficult loss over the Carolina Panthers, a stunning loss. They're taking on the Cleveland Browns, and I think the Raiders are going to figure things out, and I think they'll get themselves back on track, so I'm going to pick them to beat the Cleveland Browns at this point. Baltimore, after a bounce-back win against Dallas, taking on the Buffalo Bills, who right now have the front runner for MVP in Josh Allen. Should be a very tricky one, but I think the Ravens will be more motivated to play and to win than the Bills. I'm not saying the Bills won't be able to come out swinging, but it's just I just feel a little gut feeling that the Ravens are going to pull off a little bit of an upset. But if not, then I think the Ravens are in some trouble, and we might be looking at a potential Super Bowl between the Minnesota Vikings and the Buffalo Bills. That would be a great matchup if you think about it. Both teams having lost 4 Super Bowls in their franchise history, going up against each other in the Super Bowl and, having that opportunity to win their first. But that's ways away, so let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Tennessee and Miami. Now, the Dolphins are still having some quarterback troubles after Skylar Thompson got hurt in the last game, but then you also have Will Levis and the Tennessee Titans also desperate. They're also looking for their first win. And I know this is going to come crazy to a lot of people, but I got the Titans pulling off an upset over the Dolphins. I just think the Dolphins, even though with Tyreek Hill, it's going to be a bit of a tough stretch. So I could be wrong, but this would be my upset pick of the week. The Tennessee Titans beating the Miami Dolphins. And finally, we had the Detroit Lions against the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle, one of 5 undefeated teams left. But I hate to say this, as much as I would want them to go 5-0, I think Detroit is going to figure things out and bounce back for this one. So my winners for this upcoming week 4, Dallas, Cincinnati, Atlanta, Houston, New York Jets, Minnesota, Pittsburgh, Los Angeles Rams, Tampa Bay, San Francisco, Washington, Kansas City, Las Vegas, Baltimore, Tennessee, and Detroit. Those are my teams that are going to get the win for this one. All right, looks like we just ended the 8th inning, still 4-3 Astros. And folks, we are going to have ourselves a Manning Cast broadcast, or I should call it the K-Rock Cast broadcast for you, if you will. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back. All right, folks, so I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I said earlier in the podcast that in the event that the Astros were winning in the 9th inning for a game which they have a chance to clinch the American League West Division, I'm going to be broadcasting this game, or at least doing it a Manning Cast version of it. Yes, that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm doing a Manning Cast version of the final, what is hopefully the final inning, the 9th inning, as the Astros currently lead 4-3 over the Seattle Mariners. Now, the Astros are in position to win over Seattle. All they need to do is hang on and get these 3 outs, and they win the division. There's a magic number in play here. That magic number is down to 2. And what a magic number is basically a number that keeps track of, how many, what needs to happen for the team that's in first place of a division in order to win, and for a team that's behind them to lose. So basically, any combination of the first place team win plus the second place team losing And so basically the maximum you can drop down to is down to 2. So for example, if the magic number was at 5 and first place team wins, that drops down to 4. If the second place team loses, then that drops down to 3. You can't match everybody, but except of course if you win. So if both teams win a game, you drop down in a magic number. So right now the magic number is at 2, but because the Astros are playing the Seattle Mariners, if they win and they hold on to these 3 outs, they get a chance to, they clinch the division. Basically, it's the Astros winning plus the Mariners losing. So all the Astros need to do is win one game. And this is probably the best chance I have right now, because if the Astros don't win, they're going to be playing at 1 o'clock tomorrow with a chance to clinch the division. So we're in the 9th inning. Josh Hader is pitching, and he throws the first pitch for a ball. Now, I'm actually using the game stat broadcast version of it because that's the only thing I can use right now, because I can't get any of the channels on here on TV. I could listen to the radio, but that would distract me from broadcasting. So the second pitch was a swinging strike. He's facing off against the first hitter, Luis Urias, for the Seattle Mariners, who to this point actually is a pinch hitter. So he's starting off as a pinch hitter. So the count is 1-1. And we've got an update. It's a line out to center field to Mauricio Dubon. So out number 1. The Astros are 2 outs away from the American League West Division title. And that would be huge. Of course, I'm hoping they win one, but if they don't win, or if they don't hang on to win this one, they would have to go play Cleveland, and they would need to win twice unless they get help from Seattle, who is unfortunately taking on Oakland. And, Oakland in their last year in the city of Oakland, they're going to move to Las Vegas soon. It's really tough because you're really hoping for something more. All right, next batter is Robles for Seattle. He swings and misses for a strike. Victor Robles, that is. So it's now an 0-1. And Robles, to this point, 0 for 4 with 1 strikeout. Josh Hader pitching for the Astros, closer. He's kind of been, he's been pitching well. I know he had a very bad game the other day, but that's tough. But he had been pitching really well until the last time. And I see that Robles tried to bunt his way on, but that's a foul ball, so the count goes to 0-2. So I'm a little nervous. If you can hear the nervousness in my voice, it's a tight game. It's a 1-run game. Because, man, you just don't really know. You just need to win one game. But you got one more with Seattle tomorrow, and then you got 3 more with the Cleveland Guardians, who are obviously a team that's already clinched a playoff spot. All right, and third pitch is a foul ball on a 97-mile-per-hour sinker, and Robles is going to call for time just to think about it more, so he's now in battle mode. I used to broadcast baseball games when I was doing ETBU. That was the one dominant sport I used to do at East Texas Baptist University before I came here to Lamar. Now I can't broadcast games at Lamar. We already got somebody that's doing that, and we're also contracted with ESPN, so it's a bit of a different environment. But so anyway, there's nobody on, 1 out, top of the 9th inning. Astros lead 4-3, and he swings and misses for strike 3. 2 outs. 2 outs. Come on, Hader. Oh, man. 2 outs. Oh, my goodness gracious. Okay, so Urias and Robles are both out. Now it's down to Julio Rodriguez, who has been the Mariners' big contributor, although today he's 1 for 4 with a strikeout. A guy that was a Rookie of the Year in 2022 against, when Jeremy Pena ended up winning the World Series MVP for the Astros in that year's World Series. So, you just don't know. But obviously, first pitch is a swing and strike, sinker, 2 outs, or 2 strikes away. Oh, man. Come on. Getting nervous. Oh, I hate these tight ball games at times. Okay, come on. Next pitch is outside for a ball. Just missed. Yeah, using this StatCast program, obviously, and this is definitely hard to tell. Anyway, count is 1 ball and 1 strike. Winning on the third pitch, and ball inside, and man, looked really close to hitting him in the thigh or the crotch area there. So 2 balls and 1 strike. Cal Raleigh is on deck, and the guy's already 2 for 4 in the ball game, so don't want him up. The pitch, swinging strike, 2 balls, 2 strikes, 1 strike away. Oh, I can just imagine the crowd going crazy right now. Oh, come on. Come on. 1 more strike, 1 more strike. Oh, this is it. Strike 3! We are the division champs! Let's go! Woo, doggy! Holy tornado! Holy Hannah! Oh my gosh! Yes! We are the division champs again! Wow. Unbelievable. I'm texting my parents right now. I'm texting my folks. We keep up with baseball games. Oh, man. This is unbelievable. Oh. So, we're back in the playoffs. And, yeah, it's going to be another stressful October.
That's what I thought. Well, I need a rest. What?
So, yeah, this is awesome. Unbelievable. Very happy. 4-3, final score. Astros win the division. Man, talk about where this team was at the start of the season. They were 12-24. Everyone thought, well, maybe this is just a one-off year, or maybe this whole golden era is going to come to an end. But the Astros said, nope, not so fast. We're going to shock everyone. And they did. They shocked everyone. They have managed to come back and overtake Seattle, who was really in control of the division for a while there. And then all of a sudden, everything just kind of faltered apart for them. So, heartbreak for Seattle, obviously. But, man, the Astros, they're in the playoffs. Now, this is going to be a tricky postseason because, obviously the Astros have never had to deal with a wild card format. Well, except for 2020, but that was a COVID year. But when this whole new wild card format started, basically there's been a theory that the teams in a wild card, if you win a series, you have at least some momentum going into your next the divisional series. Because except for the Astros, the teams that have been playing in the divisional round, you don't really struggle. At least the top seeded teams have struggled for some time. So yeah, it's definitely going to be exciting. But I feel like I am a little nervous about this postseason because obviously with where we're going to be seated. But hey, you cannot count the Astros out of the game. So yeah, this is crazy. So anyways, folks, that is going to wrap it up for this edition of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock. And I'm ending this on a happy note. The Houston Astros, American League Western Division champions again. And we are very excited to have some postseason baseball, at least for next week. So I think we're more than likely going to be playing Cleveland just because they're the number 2 seed. But hey, whatever it happens. We're going to be ready to go. And I think that this is not going to be the end of an era. And I feel confident we'll get a 3rd championship, if not this year, then next year. But yeah, that's just my confidence. I mean, I can be stubborn sometimes, but I still feel confident in the Astros. I feel confident in the Texans, and I feel confident in the Rockets. All 3 teams getting a championship, in the near future. But anyways, folks, that's going to do it for another edition of Krocking, Locking, and Dropping with the K-Rock. Hey, if you guys want to listen to my podcast, again, my YouTube channel, KWCLINE91, along with Spotify and Podbean as my podcast. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm ending this on a happy note. The Astros are back in the playoffs, and man, it's going to be a crazy one, I got a feeling. So we'll hopefully hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And folks, we hope you have yourselves a great day. Go Astros. Let's go get ourselves a 3rd ring.